On a quiet Sunday morning, the Monroe family just wanted pancakes. Nothing fancy, just a warm breakfast, a quick laugh, maybe a refill of coffee. They'd been driving since dawn, crossing small towns with names that rarely made the news. Ellis, a calm and steady man in his 40s, pulled into the Waffle House because it was familiar, predictable, safe, or so he thought. He held the door open for his daughter Naya, 11 years old and always watching. Danielle, his wife, thanked him softly as they stepped inside. The air smelled like syrup and bacon grease, the kind of aroma that usually came with kindness. But from the moment they entered, something felt off. The waitress behind the counter, Paula, didn't greet them. She glanced up, met Ellis's eyes for half a second, then looked away like he wasn't there. She poured coffee for a table of white customers, cracked a joke they all laughed at, and ignored the Monroes entirely. Danielle tried to brush it off. Maybe she's overwhelmed. Maybe she didn't see us. But Nia saw everything. She leaned in and whispered, "Why didn't she say hi, Mom?" Ellis approached the counter, polite but firm. "Excuse me, could we get some menus?" Paula didn't flinch. She didn't smile. She just stared and said, "We're not serving right now." No explanation, no apology, just a wall. Then the bell above the door rang again. A young white couple walked in, laughing, holding hands. Paula greeted them with a smile, led them to a booth, handed them menus without hesitation. Naya looked at her mom, eyes wide. Danielle didn't answer. She didn't need to. They took a table near the window anyway. Quiet, respectful, waiting, not causing a scene. But Paula didn't like that. Her voice, loud enough for nearby customers to hear, "If y'all don't leave, I'm calling the police." Ellis didn't raise his voice. He didn't move. "That's your right," he said. And just like that, the story shifted. From breakfast to civil rights, from bacon and eggs to bias and law enforcement. Paula walked off, muttering something under her breath. Danielle glanced around and realized the stares had begun. Some curious, some judgmental. All heavy. Nia, small but sharp, quietly pulled out her old phone under the table. She opened the camera app. She'd seen enough online to know what might come next. This wasn't just a bad service moment. This was something else, something bigger. And across from her, Ellis sat still, shoulders square, eyes calm, jaw set. He wasn't just a father, not just a customer, not just another black man being told to leave a place he had every right to be. He was something Paula would never see coming. But the camera would. And the country would, too. Ellis Monroe didn't flinch when Paula walked away. He simply adjusted his watch, took a breath, and sat down beside his wife and daughter, as if nothing had happened. Danielle placed a hand on his knee under the table, not to calm him, but to anchor them both. Naya pressed record. Her phone rested quietly against her juice glass, its lens angled upward, catching the waitress's every passive-aggressive glance and whisper. Ellis didn't need to explain what was happening. They all felt it. This wasn't about service, this was about silence, weaponized and heavy. The Monroe family sat in a kind of stillness that made people nervous. They didn't argue. They didn't yell. They didn't storm out. And that, to people like Paula, was more threatening than rage. Around them, forks paused mid-air, conversations lowered to murmurs. A man in a corner booth folded his newspaper slower than before. It wasn't chaos, but it was disruption. The kind that made people look away without really understanding why. Paula made sure to pass by their table twice, loudly refilling coffee for other guests, never once looking in their direction. On her third trip, she leaned toward another waitress, whispering just loud enough for Nia's camera to catch, "They're just sitting there trying to make a point, always pulling the race card." The other waitress nodded, then glanced toward the Monroes, her expression somewhere between discomfort and disdain. Ellis caught it. So did Danielle. A few tables over, a white-haired man wearing a Vietnam veteran cap stood slowly, steadied himself on his cane, and walked toward the family. Danielle tensed, unsure of what was coming. But the man stopped by their table, cleared his throat, and said gently, "You folks doing all right?" Ellis met his eyes and replied, "We're doing fine, sir. Just waiting on menus." The man nodded. "Well, you deserve one. Just wanted to say that." He walked off without another word. The small moment didn't fix anything, but it mattered. The camera caught that too. Minutes passed. No menus, no water, no eye contact. Paula began wiping clean tables that didn't need cleaning. Danielle glanced at her husband and mouthed, "She's not backing down." Ellis nodded, then leaned back and pulled out his phone. Not to record, but to send a single message. He typed carefully, eyes still calm. "Active observation complete. Recommend escalation." Then he locked the screen. Outside, the sky was still soft with morning light. Inside, tension thickened. Paula made one more round, and then stopped at the register. She picked up the phone and dialed 911, her voice suddenly high and panicked, like a rehearsed performance. "Yes, I have 3 individuals refusing to leave the premises. They're disturbing customers and being aggressive. I need an officer here immediately." Nia's phone captured every word. Danielle placed a napkin over it to shield the camera but didn't press stop. Ellis closed his eyes. "Let her," he whispered. "Let it all play out." Within 10 minutes, the low rumble of tires on gravel signaled the arrival of the sheriff's office. A white patrol truck pulled into the parking lot. On the side, bold black letters read, "Cole County Sheriff's Department." A man in uniform stepped out, Deputy Cole Maddox, broad-shouldered, buzz-cut, walking with the confidence of someone used to being obeyed. Paula met him at the door, gesturing wildly toward the family. She was in full character now. "That's them," she hissed. "They won't leave." Deputy Maddox scanned the room, then slowly approached the Monroe table. Danielle sat upright. Nia slid her phone back into her jacket, but it kept recording. Ellis looked up, eyes steady, voice even. "Morning, Deputy. Can we help you with something?" The deputy didn't respond right away. He looked over the family, noting their posture, their presence, the fact that nothing about them matched Paula's description of aggressive. But protocol, his kind of protocol, didn't need evidence. "Sir," he said gruffly, "the staff says you've been disruptive and refused to leave when asked." Ellis folded his hands on the table. "We asked for menus. We waited, that's all." Deputy Maddox stared him down. "I'm going to need you to step outside with me." Danielle's jaw tightened. Nia reached for her father's hand. Ellis gently squeezed it before rising from his seat. "Of course," he said. "No problem." He didn't raise his voice. He didn't ask why, but he wasn't surrendering either. As he followed the deputy outside, customers leaned to see through the window. Danielle kept her composure, but Nia's lip trembled. "Mom," she whispered, "they're treating him like he's done something wrong." Danielle didn't answer. She simply took a breath and watched the door close behind her husband. Outside, Deputy Maddox led Ellis toward the patrol car. "Hands where I can see them." Ellis complied. Calm, controlled. Not because he was scared, but because he knew exactly what this was. Maddox began questioning him, where he was from, why he was there, who he worked for. Ellis gave short, legal-safe answers. No more, no less. Inside the restaurant, Paula watched from behind the counter, arms crossed like she'd won something. But Danielle watched her differently. Not with anger, but with understanding. This wasn't new, this wasn't random. This was how systems protected themselves, with politeness that poisoned and rules applied selectively. In that moment, it was no longer about breakfast. It was about dignity, about visibility, about the price of existing in a place where being calm, well-dressed, and respectful was still treated as a threat. And just as Deputy Maddox reached for his radio to call for backup, something unexpected happened, something Paula, and perhaps the whole town, never could have seen coming. But that was the next part of the story, and Ellis Monroe was ready for it. Deputy Cole Maddox tightened his grip on his radio, his other hand resting just above his holster, not because Ellis Monroe had done anything wrong, but because Maddox felt control slipping and didn't know what else to hold on to. The Waffle House parking lot was quiet except for the distant hum of morning traffic and the occasional clink of silverware from inside. Ellis stood calmly, hands visible, expression unreadable. "You want to tell me why you're really here?" Maddox asked. His tone had shifted. Less official, more accusatory. Ellis didn't respond with indignation or fear. Instead, he asked a question of his own, soft but direct. "You sure you want to keep going down this path, Deputy?" It wasn't defiance, it was warning, wrapped in patience. Maddox ordered him to turn around. "Put your hands on the hood." Ellis complied without hesitation, his fingers resting gently on the sun-warmed metal. The deputy began a light pat-down, unnecessary and excessive for someone who hadn't even raised his voice. Inside the diner, Nia clutched her mom's sleeve. "They're treating him like a criminal," she whispered. Danielle kept her eyes on the window, lips pressed together, one arm instinctively in front of her daughter like a shield. "Just keep the camera rolling," she whispered back. The absurdity of the moment didn't escape Ellis. A man in business slacks, a neatly pressed shirt and wedding ring, now being frisked in a small-town parking lot for the crime of waiting on breakfast. It wasn't about public safety. It was about public performance. Maddox needed a show of force, something to remind the others watching that order still belonged to people like him. "Name?" Maddox barked. "Ellis Monroe." "Occupation?" Ellis paused. "Consulting." "Consulting what?" Another pause. "Compliance." It was just enough truth to satisfy the question, but not enough to explain the weight he carried. Maddox frowned, unsatisfied. He radioed for backup, muttering code into the mic, his posture firm like a man trying to assert dominance over a situation he didn't understand. Ellis glanced toward the diner. Through the window, he saw his daughter. She didn't look scared anymore. She looked focused. Back inside, Paula Greer smirked. She leaned into the counter and whispered to a regular, "Bet he's got a record. They always do." Her voice dripped with a certainty built not on facts, but on years of unchecked assumptions. But what she didn't realize, what none of them realized, was that every word, every glance, every action was being documented, quietly and thoroughly. Then, just as Maddox stepped back to double-check Ellis's ID, the sound of tires crunching gravel sliced through the air. A sleek black SUV pulled into the lot, unmarked but unmistakably federal. The windows were tinted. The plates were government. Maddox's head turned, confusion briefly flashing across his face. The vehicle parked deliberately, not in haste but with precision, like everything had already been planned. The back door opened, and a tall man in a dark suit stepped out, clipboard in hand, badge already visible. He walked straight toward Maddox with a calm authority that silenced the space around him. "Deputy Maddox?" the man asked. Maddox squared up, uncertain. "Who's asking?" The man handed over a document. "Agent Raymond Locke, Department of Justice. You're currently engaging with an active federal compliance investigator under DOJ directive. Mr. Monroe is part of a civil rights auditing initiative." Maddox blinked. "What?" Ellis turned slowly, his cuffs never needed, his expression unchanged. "Told you this wasn't the path you wanted." Agent Locke continued, voice firm. "As of this moment, all interactions involving Mr. Monroe are under federal review. We're collecting body cam footage, internal communications, and surveillance from the premises. Please stand aside." Inside the diner, Danielle stood up, guiding Nia toward the front as silence fell over the customers. Paula dropped the coffee pot in her hand. It shattered on the floor. Maddox looked lost. "No one told me—" Locke cut him off, "and that's the point." The agent turned toward Ellis. "Sir, your presence here has yielded sufficient data. We're ready for extraction." It sounded clinical, but beneath the formality was a message Ellis understood. You did exactly what was needed. Ellis brushed off his shirt, adjusted his collar, and walked past Maddox without a word. Locke nodded at Danielle and Naya as they stepped outside. "Ma'am, Miss Monroe." Paula tried to follow them out, stammering something about misunderstanding, but the second agent at the SUV stopped her. "We'll need your statement. Please return inside." The door closed behind her with a finality that felt earned. The customers, once voyeurs to a public humiliation, now sat still, unsure of who they'd been watching or what they'd just witnessed. The man they assumed was another black troublemaker turned out to be the very person investigating them. The cop who thought he held the power had just been outranked, and the waitress who thought she could manipulate the system had become the evidence. Ellis opened the SUV door, paused, and glanced back at the diner. Not in anger, not in pride, but with a measured look that said everything without a word. This was not revenge. This was accountability. This was systemic reform in motion, quiet, deliberate, legal. And Cole County would remember that morning for a long, long time. As the black SUV pulled away from the Waffle House parking lot, the silence it left behind was heavier than any siren. Inside the vehicle, Agent Raymond Locke handed Ellis a sealed folder without saying a word. Danielle sat beside her husband, holding Naya close, her hand gently stroking their daughter's curls as if to remind her, "You're safe. You're seen." Ellis opened the file just enough to glimpse the DOJ letterhead and a list of incident markers. His name was right there, Ellis Monroe, Lead Compliance Officer, Department of Justice, Civil Rights Division. This wasn't just a response, it was a mission. And now, it had everything it needed to move forward. The operation had been authorized months earlier, part of a sweeping initiative to investigate microaggressions and racially discriminatory patterns in service industries across southern states. Waffle House locations, unfortunately, had surfaced repeatedly in anonymous reports. But to prove a pattern, the DOJ needed real-time engagement, not lawsuits after the fact. Witnessed misconduct, recorded, and provable. Ellis volunteered for the field assignment himself, not because he had to, but because he'd lived it. He understood that some battles aren't won in courtrooms, they're won in quiet rooms where policy is shaped by evidence. Back in Cole County, the effect was immediate. That same afternoon, Locke and his team entered the Waffle House with federal orders. They requested all internal security footage, staffing schedules, service logs, and 911 transcripts. Every action Paula Greer had taken was time-stamped. Every table she skipped, every guest she favored, every coded phrase she whispered, now became data points. The footage didn't just show bias, it showed consistency. This wasn't a one-time lapse in judgment, it was learned behavior. Deputy Cole Maddox, meanwhile, was called to the county office and placed on administrative leave. The sheriff's department issued a vague statement about procedural review and community trust. But behind closed doors, Locke had already filed a preliminary misconduct report. Maddox's actions, unwarranted detainment, misuse of authority, and failure to verify identity, violated several DOJ oversight protocols. He wasn't just embarrassed, he was exposed. A man who had never been questioned was now under federal scrutiny, and there was no body cam footage to accidentally lose. The DOJ had already downloaded it. As news of the incident spread, it caught fire online. Nia's video, uploaded with the caption, "They didn't know who my dad was, now they do," garnered over 1 million views in 48 hours. Comments poured in, black parents sharing their own restaurant stories, veterans denouncing what they saw, lawyers offering to represent the family for free. The story hit the trending section under tags like #service discrimination, #justice in real time, and #dignity is not disruptive. Social media wasn't just a megaphone, it became a courtroom of public opinion. Paula tried to backpedal. She claimed confusion, stress, even a bad morning. But the footage left no space for excuses. She hadn't ignored the Monroes. She had actively chosen to erase them, a choice now documented in high resolution. Corporate Waffle House issued a statement of apology and placed her on indefinite suspension pending the outcome of the DOJ's investigation. But the damage was already done. For Paula, the lesson was brutal but necessary. This wasn't the 1960s. Discrimination might hide in smiles and polite refusals now, but it still bleeds when dragged into the light. Ellis, meanwhile, declined interviews. He refused to capitalize on the moment. When a local reporter asked him why he stayed silent through the entire ordeal, he said, "Because the system was loud enough. It didn't need my voice. It needed my presence." That line alone was quoted across news articles, blogs, and civil rights websites. It struck a chord, not just with those who had been victims, but with those who had been complicit through silence. Danielle returned to her school the next Monday, greeted with uneasy smiles from staff who had seen the story and weren't sure where to look. She didn't need to say anything. Her presence alone had changed the climate. A few teachers approached her to say thank you, not for making noise, but for making change. Naya, now somewhat of a quiet celebrity among her peers, was invited to speak at her school's assembly about courage and the power of recording truth. She didn't boast. She didn't cry. She just showed the video again and said one line, "I didn't know it would matter, but it did." The DOJ's internal findings led to a memo that was circulated across regional training programs, one that used the Cole County incident as a case study for how racial bias in public service manifests subtly, consistently, and dangerously. It outlined 10 behavioral triggers to watch for, new standards for service transparency, and a national rollout of accountability tools in known high-risk areas. Ellis's assignment wasn't just successful, it shifted policy. And through all of it, he never once raised his voice. Because justice, when done right, doesn't require volume. It requires precision. It requires patience. And it requires people like Ellis Monroe, men who know the law not just on paper, but in their bones. Men who understand that dignity isn't granted. It's defended, quietly, legally, permanently. On the ride home, Nia sat quietly in the back seat, her phone resting in her lap, her eyes fixed on the passing trees. She had watched her father get searched in front of strangers. She had seen her mother hold back a storm. And she had captured it all with the kind of quiet courage most adults never find. That evening, in her bedroom, she opened her journal and wrote, "Today, I saw my dad protect us without yelling. He used silence like a shield. He made justice look calm." She underlined the word calm 3 times. That's what stuck with her. Not the fear, not the anger, the calm. Danielle sat at the kitchen table later that night, sipping cold tea and staring at her inbox, flooded with messages from other parents, former students, even strangers from across the country. Some thanked her. Some cried with her. One message simply said, "I thought I was crazy, but now I know I'm not alone." That line stayed with her more than any headline ever could. Ellis, as always, said little. But his actions kept echoing. The DOJ case was now in full motion. Cole County Waffle House was being audited along with 6 other locations. The sheriff's office had requested a temporary liaison from the Civil Rights Division. Training modules were being updated, internal policies rewritten, not because of outrage, but because of evidence. And all of it began with a family that didn't yell, didn't fight, didn't walk out. They stayed, and they watched. In a world so loud with distraction, sometimes the most powerful act is refusing to be pushed out of your seat. This wasn't just about breakfast. It never was. It was about a system that hopes you'll second-guess yourself. A culture that counts on your silence, meaning surrender. But the Monroe family showed something else. That dignity isn't something you earn. It's something you carry. And when someone tries to take it, You don't always have to raise your voice to get it back. Sometimes you just have to stay seated, watch, and record everything. Now let me ask you something. Have you ever been in that seat? Have you ever walked into a room and felt like you weren't supposed to be there? Not because you did anything wrong, but because of how you looked, or how your voice sounded, or the history your skin carries with it. Have you ever asked for simple respect and been told you were difficult, entitled, or disruptive? Because if you have, you're not alone and you're not invisible. There's a reason stories like Ellis Monroe's hit deep. They don't just show injustice. They remind us of the quiet ways it repeats itself. At restaurants, in offices, at schools, during traffic stops. These aren't just isolated incidents. They are systemic patterns, repeated in subtle forms that slowly wear people down. But they can be recorded, they can be challenged, they can be changed. That's why this channel tells these stories. Not just to expose what's wrong, but to remind you of what's possible. That legal accountability, civil rights, and equal protection under the law aren't just phrases in textbooks. They're tools you're allowed to use. And sometimes all it takes is one person refusing to be erased to change an entire system. If this story moved you, don't let it end here. Share it, discuss it. And if you've ever experienced something similar, tell us in the comments. Your voice matters, your presence matters, your story matters. And if you believe that dignity is not disruptive and that justice doesn't need to scream to be heard, then subscribe. This platform is for people who are tired of being silenced and ready to be seen. Because what happened in Cole County didn't end when Ellis Monroe walked out of that diner. That's where it began.